text, we're seeing what does God's kindness look like, and it's how David treats Mephibosheth. And you go, wow, that's how I've come to know Christ, is he treats me in a very similar way to how David treats Mephibosheth, from restoring land that was taken away to always eating at my table, to being waited on by servants. I mean, it is, again, it's one of the most clear pictures of the gospel from the Old Testament. And David sets us up by saying, I'm going to give you an object lesson. I'm going to show him God's kindness. And there's so many things I can't wait to get into.
No, I'm glad that you're. I think you're coming at this on a similar angle that I am, and it's just such a cool image, and I think you see that in the teaching of the Lord Jesus in the New Testament, just the images of being at the table, right, and what that means, right, being invited to the table, and that He would deign to have us at His table, and wow, yeah, so very, very, very cool New Testament image that you find here in the Old Testament, as you were saying. Well, before we get too ahead of ourselves, though, brother, would you start us out with a prayer?
Sure. Lord, thank you for this day and giving us time to spend together in your word. We pray that through the study of your word, our faith in you as our Savior and Lord would be strengthened and your kingdom built up by faith. We ask this all through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. All right. So let's go ahead and we'll read the chapter through, just to get it out there on the table. Before we do so, though, there's a few different names, characters. I guess maybe there's somebody wondering, okay, now hang on a second. Who was Mephibosheth again? So maybe refresh our memories, kind of place a couple things from context for us.
Yeah, so I mean, the first time he's brought up is, you're going back to chapter 4, is the first time we meet Mephibosheth. And even his name, it means from the mouth of shame, right? So he doesn't have a very good, it's like Ichabod, right? I mean, it's like, it's one of those names that if you love your kid, you're not going to name him this. I've tried. My wife, we're expecting our third child here in a couple of months.
Oh, hey,
and I have
congrats.
tried to get Melissa to name our kid Mephibosheth because, you have a coronial also on the way.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I do in March.
Good deal. We're actually due January 1st, so we're right on the tax break line. But
yeah.
So well, congratulations to you. That's fantastic.
Yes, and to you. That's great. That's great stuff. Wow. What a way to start the new year.
Yeah, it rules out. I mean, for me, it rules out an ery retirement. That's kind of nice, and
Well, you need some motivation to keep going, right? So, it's just, God sometimes knows how to give us that kick in the pants. So
that would be good. So we meet Mephibosheth in 2 Samuel chapter 4. Jonathan, the son of Saul, had a son who was crippled in his feet, and so right away we meet the son. He is unclean. He is crippled, and so that's unfortunate. That he was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan, that they perished, right, came from Jezreel, and his nurse took him up and fled. And the reason why, you alluded to this, the reason why they're fleeing is because when a new king comes along, the first thing you do is kill all the family members and the officials of the previous dynasty, because they would represent a threat to your throne. So the nurse picks up Mephibosheth and flees because he's a wanted man, or should be a wanted man.
That's what they would expect.
Right, so she flees. In haste, he fell and became lame, and his name was Mephibosheth. And so that's the background. So he's this guy that when you're in chapter 4, you're like, well, I don't need to. He's a threat, but he's not really a threat. I mean, who's going to follow the crippled son of the former king? I mean, he's a threat, but he isn't. He's a pitiful character. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important for understanding what we're learning here when we get to chapter 9.
Yeah. No, that's right. I mean, no one's scared of this guy. He's like Tiny Tim or something, right? And and this is, I think, part of the reason too why it was back when Ishbosheth was, speaking of all those fun names, was murdered. That I mean, it's kind of mentioned in connection to that, where it seemed as if those Beerothites were saying like, okay, well, Mephibosheth's out. He can't walk. He's not a credible threat. As like someone who's going to march onto the battlefield and lead people against David. So really, that just leaves Ishbosheth. So if we get rid of him, hey, like David's free and clear. So yeah, I think that kind of also speaks to that idea there. Maybe we'll want to talk like a little bit more actually like about the name, but let's go ahead and just get into the chapter itself. So here we got 2 Samuel chapter 9, beginning from the top. This is the English Standard Version. And David said, "Is there still anyone left of the house of Saul, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake?" Now there was a servant of the house of Saul, whose name was Ziba, and they called him to David. And the king said to him, "Are you Ziba?" And he said, "I am your servant." And the king said, "Is there not still someone of the house of Saul, that I may show the kindness of God to him?" Ziba said to the king, "There is still a son of Jonathan. He is crippled in his feet." And the king said to him, "Where is he?" And Ziba said to the king, "He is in the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel, at Lo-debar." Then King David sent and brought him from the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel, at Lo-debar. And Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, son of Saul, came to David, and fell on his feet and paid homage. And David said, "Mephibosheth." And he answered, "Behold, I am your servant." And David said to him, "Do not fear, for I will show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. And I will restore to you all the land of Saul your father, and you shall eat at my table always." And he paid homage and said, "What is your servant, that you should show regard for a dead dog such as I?" Then the king called Ziba, Saul's servant, and said to him, "All that belonged to Saul and to all his house I have given to your master's grandson. And you and your sons and your servants shall till the land for him, and shall bring in the produce, that your master's grandson may have bread to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, shall always eat at my table." Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then Ziba said to the king, "According to all that my lord the king commands his servant, so will your servant do." So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. And Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah, and all who lived in Ziba's house became Mephibosheth's servants. So Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, for he ate always at the king's table. Now he was lame in both of his feet. So, like you were saying, I think at the core of it, I think there's a very relatable, kind of like surprisingly soft, warm picture here of just this kindness, an image of grace. Very, very neat moment that feels very New Testament-like in the middle, where when Mephibosheth is brought there, perhaps. It's interesting. It says in verse 7, "Do not fear," right? You're wondering, like, oh man, if you're Mephibosheth,
yeah.
he's found me, right? Like he's tying up loose
you wonder
ends.
the whole time they bring Ziba in, right?
Yeah.
And Ziba bows down because he probably thinks I'm losing my head in this deal. At the end of the day, I'm not here. Are you Ziba? Yeah, I'm your servant. Like, please don't kill me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on your side.
Yep.
And then, is there someone else of your house that I can show kindness? And you're like, this sounds like something King Herod would do. Like, where is this one born King of the Jews, that I too may come and worship him? Like, oh yeah, you want to show this guy kindness?
Yeah,
right, right.
It's, yeah, it's like, is there anyone left in the house of Saul? Because I'd like to take care of them. Like, oh no, what is that? Oh, no. I know what he means by so yeah. And then David, just he says his name, and that. I think that's a big moment too, where he says the name, but then he says, do not fear. Just like these moments, like an angel, or like the Lord Jesus to someone before him who's just thinking like, oh no, like what's happened to me, or just you think of the disciples on the Mount Transfiguration, right? Like they're just scared, and then Jesus takes them on the shoulder and says, "Hey, it's okay, it's just me. Don't be afraid." So just very, very cool, I think, image overall. There are a number of little intriguing elements to the story that we want to talk about, like the way that Mephibosheth is referred to as Saul's grandson. Is that what it says? And then the last verse, just seems kind of almost random. I feel like, I mean, at least in the translation, it's just like, now he was lame in both his feet. It's like, well, we sort of already have established that like a couple of times, and that's an odd way to end the chapter. Yeah, so there's a couple of things like that, but yeah, overall, just a beautiful picture. Anything, I don't know, just thoughts on that, or any other little quirks or details that jump out at you?
Well, the idea, I mean, to me, this is one of those, we're reading the Old Testament, or we're reading the Bible in a year at home for devotions. Our kids are 6 and 8.
Yeah.
And so we're in the prophets, right? We got through the history books and trying to get them excited about some of these, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, there's things that pop up that they get excited about. And then all the history books about, the genealogies and are we really going to read the first 9 chapters of First Chronicles? Those kind of things. And trying to explain to kids why this was really important for them. It's kind of a stretch to figure out why it's important for us, at least at that age and even older. But this is one of those texts where you're like, how is this not written? How am I not the primary audience of this text? I mean, it begins with David saying, I want to show kindness to someone for the sake of another. And you're going, that's God's relationship with me. He's showing me kindness because of the relationship, because of what Jesus has done. And this is my relationship with God. And for David to say, not just, he says at the beginning, I want to show kindness, but then he goes, I want to show a specific kind of kindness, not just random, I want to be nice to him, but I want to show God's kindness. So I'm going to deal with Mephibosheth the way the Lord has dealt with me. And you're going, oh, well, what way is that? And again, it's this do not fear, calls him by name, and then everything is by grace. I should kill you. Mephibosheth's right. What is your servant that you should notice a dead dog like me?
Yeah.
He's not wrong. And he's blown away with, why is my head still attached to my body? Like I'm in the presence of the king, who's my natural enemy. I'm still crippled in both feet. And again, back then, crippled, not like we know today. Back then, that was one of the ways a person could be ceremonially unclean. Because I'm a nobody. I'm an enemy to you. I'm unclean. I offer you nothing. I can't do anything for you. No one's going to follow me into battle. Like I'm kind of worthless on my own merits, on my own righteousness. But you're giving me back the kingdom of my father Saul. And who knows if that was the actual kingdom of Saul, like you see on the map outlined, or whether it was Saul's ancestral land. But anyway, David is taking a risk by setting Mephibosheth up like, you can be a threat now. Like you have resources and 35 or so servants. Like if you wanted to make my life miserable, David, you could probably do it with what I'm giving you. I'm giving you an opportunity to hurt me. And it's all by grace. None of it's deserved. And it's still at the end that, oh, and by the way, he's still crippled. It's still the same old Mephibosheth. Right? And you're going, how is this not my relationship with God? Right? He calls me by name, tells me not to fear, gives me everything by grace that I don't deserve because of his relationship with another, because of Jesus. And it's still the same old me. And who am I that you should, of all the people of the earth, why should you notice a dead dog like me?
Yeah, well,
it is the clearest picture of the gospel in the Old Testament.
Yeah, no, I love just again and again, like you were saying, how I mean, even in the chapter, just in the language, I mean, David's making it clear, like I want to do this for you, not because of you even, right, but because of someone else, which is just a neat New Testament image. And then there's this dog language too, and just I mean, actually, it was just on Sunday that like I was it was the commemoration. It was I think the day that a lot of churches observed Reformation, but it was also the commemoration of Tabitha and who are the other ones, Lydia and Phoebe, and so kind of like thinking of like examples of women of faith in the scriptures. One of the ones that jumps out at you, the Syrophoenician woman, right, who compares herself to dogs, right? So, I mean, this dog language too, and that kind of moment also. There's so many. Okay, we could go on, I think, but I'm going to try to restrain myself here a little bit. Let's go back to the beginning of the chapter and just take a look at some of these little details here. make sure we don't miss these gems. So at the beginning of the chapter, and David said, and it just kind of goes right off of what we had in the previous chapter. Interesting, at the end of chapter 8, you had this comment, David's sons were priests. And this came up in a question from last time, because you're thinking to yourself, now hang on a second, why are David's sons priests, right? Because Judahites, right? Like they're not supposed to be, the Levites are supposed to be priests. But the text actually says that his sons like served as priests, or like had come to serve in priestly functions or something like this, which I feel like is kind of an interesting tie-in then to this chapter, right? About the idea of kind of getting to exercise certain rights and privileges, even if you're not necessarily entitled to them. So, I mean, I wonder, this might kind of seem like a little bit out of left field then when he's like, hey, I want to do something nice for the house of Saul. But I think that there's maybe even a few more tie-ins. What do you think?
It could be. I mean, so if you're left at the end of chapter 8 going, wow, David's sons are undeserving of this privilege, and then you get to chapter 9, speaking of undeserving, but wait, there's more. Yeah. You want to talk about undeserving. And then it gets into David is showing his son's kindness, but now he's showing the Lord's kindness. It ratchets up the grace, the hesed, the mercy that God shows. And so maybe if you read it back, you could say, yeah, David's sons are undeserving. They shouldn't be allowed to hold that position. Like, well, I shouldn't be a son of God either. I shouldn't be part of his family either. If we're going to play the merit game, we're all locally, we're crippled in both feet, and we're from Lodabar. I mean, so I think you can definitely tie in an undeserved status or position that some people are going to be offended by.
And I think right along with that, there's the idea of sparing some remnant, and I think that was a big theme back in chapter 8. And in fact, there was something that only struck my eye in hindsight. We spent a good chunk of time talking about how David spared exactly 1/3 of the Moabites. The conversation we had with Pastor Lekumsky, and we talked about, okay, well, why is he attacking the Moabites to begin with? But I would encourage everyone to check out the podcast. It was a good conversation. But one of the things that was interesting too, it didn't even hit me. You have all these big numbers thrown around, and it says there's 22,000 Syrians that David struck down. There's 18,000 Edomites that are struck down. Right? How many is that? That's 40,000. Well, it also says though that he took, right? Didn't slaughter. He didn't, strike down, but he, I guess I don't kind of forcibly conscripted, but that means spare their lives. 20,000 then after his defeat of Hadadezer. So if he spares 20,000, and I know it's like, oh no, math question early in the morning. Well, it's not that early, but if you're on the Pacific Coast like me, it's still the morning, right? I need to take a drink of this green tea, speaking of which. If you spare 20,000 and you kill 40,000, then how many of the total have you spared? That is 1/3. Same fraction that you had with the Moabites. And so I'm wondering if there's really kind of also just this theme of sparing, right? Spare a remnant. And this is, hey, I'm going to spare a remnant from the house of Saul and fulfill my pledge to him. His name will not be cut off.
And that, you might be seeing that at the end where it talks about that Mephibosheth, even though he's crippled in both feet, he does have a son. So the lineage of Saul and Jonathan continues. That we have not wiped them out from the face of the whole earth. They too have an ongoing remnant. That even this crippled in both feet from Lodabar is able to carry on the family line.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what Saul asked of him. I can't remember the chapter. It was like towards the end of 1 Samuel, but when they had that covenant with him, and also his covenant with Jonathan, that the name would not be cut off, and you see that again and again. throughout the scriptures, and a very cool gospel side to that as well. It's time for our break, though, but when we get back, we'll speak more to that point here, looking at 2 Samuel chapter 9 on Thy Strong Word. Be right back.
Our Christian faith is under constant attack.
Okay, 90 seconds.
At Faith Lutheran School in Plano, Texas, we believe that
nothing on email, but there was a question here on Facebook, because I was kind of alluding to it without doing anything with it. Yeah, the name Mephibosheth. We got to talk about that, right? Because it was funny. Pastor McClellan said, this is not something you name your kid if you love him. Right? Like, what was it? Like, from the mouth of shame. Oof. But you don't. Our picture of Jonathan is like not like a bad guy. I mean, he's super pious, super loyal, like to his father. I mean, just highest standards of family conduct. So why is he naming his kid that? Well, he didn't name his kid that. He named his kid probably Maribel, something like that. Maribel, something that sounds like kind of his brother, Ishbaal. We talk about what that means.
When I look at the X-ray of your funny bone,
so
it seems that everything is
so yeah,
okay.
Ishbaal, right? Like kind of like man of the Lord. Baal being a term that basically means Adonai in that context. So Maribel then might mean something like I don't know, like God is my champion, or like the Lord is my champion. The Lord contends for me. The Lord will present my case. Welcome back, everybody, to Thy Strong Word. I'm Pastor A.J. Espinosa. We're looking at 2 Samuel chapter 9. Just an awesome gospel image here. Not known so well, but we're talking about it here with Mephibosheth. What a fun name there. Well, is that actually his name? This actually kind of brings up a fun point here. If you've got a question or comment for us, that was one of the questions. Like, hang on a second, is there some kind of name change stuff going on here? That was one of the questions on Facebook.com/AJ Espinosa. Just put your questions or comments right there in the box on the live stream. You can also give us a call, 1-800-730-2727, or if you're in St. Louis, 314-821-0850. Any questions or comments, or you can always send an email to kfuo@kfuo.org. If you've got a question for me or our guest today, Pastor Duncan McClellan, pastor at St. Paul in Ankeny, Iowa, where lots of good things are going on, including a countdown to number 3. Congrats again.
Thank you.
That's really something too. January. Well, that would be very interesting too if it was actually January 1st, right? Because, anyways, I could go on about like names and dates, and I really get too much excited about that. But here's a name that I should not be forgetting to mention: the Lutheran Heritage Foundation. There are underwriters for Thy Strong Word. Their website, lhfmissions.org. I don't know if you'll find any illustrated books starring Mephibosheth, but they do distribute a lot of like cool materials and books, storybooks even, different things in different languages, lots of cool things. lhfmissions.org. All right, so let's get back to this here. I think we were seeing some like thematic connections, this whole sparing a remnant. And of course, that's a big theme in the Bible in general, right? And you don't want to talk about, at the beginning of the program, you're mentioning like, well, see, how do we see ourselves? Like, well, I mean, we're here because God spared a remnant, right?
Mm-hmm. He has not given up, and he will have a people for his own.
Well, and I think that too, when you look at the language of Isaiah, for instance, there's this talk, like who is like my servant, who is, like it's like the list is like blind and crippled and deaf and mute, right? Like it's just everything going on here. And I think that the idea there is that, a lot of those descriptors too, deaf, mute, blind, unable to walk, are descriptions of idols, right? And so I think the idea on a certain level, it's going way back to when we read Isaiah on the program, God's people has become like the idols that they have turned to. They're, good for nothing, and they ought to be wiped out according to the curses of, Moses, right? But God spares his people anyway, and this spared, undeserving, incapable remnant is what gets to end up eating at the Master's table in this thing that we call the church and the Lord's Supper. I mean, you can look at it, I think, on the level that you were describing as kind of like, hey, this is me, and you identify with Mephibosheth on an individual level, like thinking of yourself as a baptized believer. But this is also what has happened with the whole church corporately too, right?
It is, and it's to me, it's striking the overabundance of provision that David provides for Mephibosheth. You're going to eat at my table always. I mean, that would have been enough for him to say, where do I sign? This is such a great deal. This is wonderful. He could have said, I'm going to give you Ziba's sons and servants, 35 men, to basically work for you. That would have set Mephibosheth up pretty good for life, again, beyond what he can deserve. Or he could have said, I'm going to give you the land of your father Saul back, and then you can sell it and buy a condo, in the villages and live happily ever after. You can do whatever you want. But he doesn't do one of those three. He does all of them. I mean, and again, what I love about this is there's no negotiation, right? There's no, if you do this for me, if you promise to be good, if you promise to carry my water, all this stuff. It is this wonderful gift of grace over in abundance that David gives to Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth, what is your servant that you should notice a dead dog like me? David doesn't pause there and say, you are kind of a scumbag. You have something there. He ignores him. When Mephibosheth says, what is your servant that you should notice a dead dog like me? The next person that David talks to is Ziba. And so this idea of, I'm not holding your sins against you. I'm not going to shove your nose in what you've done in the past. All is forgiven. All is atoned for, redeemed. We see that in how Christ treats us, right? That he doesn't hold our past sins against us. That's not who we are anymore because of him by grace. But also, again, coming back to, there's no negotiation here. This is the way it's going to be. And it's this wonderful, grace-filled thing. And again, you hate to allegorize. I mean, if your initial move is to allegorize a text, usually you end up, in a bad place. But this is one where an allegorical interpretation to the church, to individual Christians, to us and Christ, it just fits. It fits so tightly, so connectedly that it's impossible to ignore, or I think even come up with another primary interpretation for this for Christians. I mean, it's right there.
Yeah. Well, yeah. No, I think there's some good reflection there about allegorizing, right? I mean, I think that the thing that we've seen again and again, the allegorical stuff is awesome, and that's. There's a very long tradition in Christian interpretation of allegorizing texts. But if you're going to get the allegory right, you got to get the actual historical situation right, or else you're just kind of allegorizing, not actually the Bible story, but just kind of a misrepresentation of it. And like you were saying, you can wind up in who knows where. But yeah, I think this story is, despite some of the oddities of it, it's kind of. I think we get it. We kind of intuitively get what the narrator's getting at, and so it's just kind of easier to see the allegory and to make it work. And I think that one of the other hooks for this here too, I think the translation in verse 1 kind of undersells the word in the Hebrew. It says that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake. Well, it says hesed. right? I mean, this is the word that we've said this word a number of times on the program. Lots of pastors and guests have brought it up too. Chesed. This is that faithfulness. This is the loyalty, right? The fealty. This is the covenant steadfastness. So this really is
it's more than just being nice.
Yeah,
it's
that's
more
right.
than just I want to do something nice for this guy.
Random act of kindness.
I'm going to go buy him a Cadillac.
Pay it forward.
Yeah, it's more than that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, see, and I think it gets to what you were saying too, that like not only is he not holding on to any past sins of Mephibosheth or his fathers, right? But he is holding on to what the good thing from the past, which is the covenant that he made with his father and with his grandfather. I mean, that really shows, I think, just how gracious this is, because it's not like he's like, all right, you know what? I'll be a big guy, Mephibosheth. I'm just giving you a blank slate. I'm just wiping it clean. You can prove yourself, or you can, show your true colors, right? But we're just starting over, starting fresh. That would be gracious all by itself, right? But he's not even doing that. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's saying, I'm going to cancel all your debts, and I'm going to leave all your credits intact. I mean, this is I don't know. It's more like the way that the parable of the unforgiving servant, where the master is just going way above and beyond, or the prodigal son, where the father's just going way above and beyond. It's kind of it's actually a prodigal level of generosity.
It really does call to mind the father of the prodigal son. Also, in that Mephibosheth is treated like family. I mean, he's given all indications of being a son by the end of the passage here, by the end of the chapter, and David goes above and beyond. And you have to wonder, just like the father of the prodigal son would have looked like a fool to his servants, to the neighbors. David kind of looks a little crazy here. I mean, this isn't how kings treat descendants of former monarchs. That you don't do this, but David does. And again, I think it hinges on that. I'm not just going to show him hesed or like a general notion of being nice. I'm going to show him God's hesed. I'm going to show him God's kindness, and he gives us the object lesson of object lessons. Are we going to have time to get into the rest of the story, chapter 16, 19, and 21, where the story of Mephibosheth doesn't end here, and it's kind of I'd like to get your thoughts actually on how it ends.
Okay. We can
spoiler
alert, but no, we can briefly make a connection. What are you thinking of?
What? I think it's just interesting that just some editorializing. So every time I teach Mephibosheth, like to a new group, they've never heard of him, and you're going, okay, I get he's Old Testament, but he's in 5 different parts of He's not a passing character in 2 Samuel. He's in 5 different chapters.
That's right.
And one of them's all about him in 9 here. But if you go on to chapter 16, basically David is fleeing, right? And Ziba comes out and says, oh, by the way, that dead dog Mephibosheth is back in Jerusalem, hitching his wagon to the next in charge. He's betraying you. And David doesn't like this. But the question is Ziba telling the truth? And then in chapter 19, Mephibosheth comes out to – now David's coming back in. He's going to be king again. And Mephibosheth comes out to meet David, and you can see by his appearance that he's been mourning. He hasn't trimmed his nails or cut his hair. He's mourning. And so that tells you that he had never betrayed David. He was always in line with him. But then you get to chapter 21, and I'd really like your thoughts on it, because I was preparing for this. And you know the guests you have on the show, we have as pastors just hours and hours and hours to prepare.
Right. That's right. Right. Well, all we do is pretty much read 1st, 2nd Samuel. Yeah.
Contemplative, right? The Hebrews out there, different scrolls and whatever. Right. So I didn't get a chance to really figure out how this ends. So chapter 21, the first 9 verses, more or less, David promises the Gibeonites, sorry for all that's happened to you. I'll give you whatever you want. And they say, well, we want the heads of, how do they say this?
Saul's sons.
Basically, they want Mephibosheth and 6 others brought before them so they can kill them.
Mm-hmm.
And then it says in verse 7, but the king spared Mephibosheth, the son of Saul's son Jonathan. So this is our guy Mephibosheth. There's not like a second Mephibosheth roaming around that we haven't heard of. This is the guy. Because of the oath of the Lord that was between them, between David and Jonathan, son of Saul.
Yeah.
So that sounds like a happy ending, right? The king won't turn him over. But then it says, the king took the two sons of Rizpah, the daughter of Ahiah, whom she bore to Saul, and it's all these names, Armoni, and Mephibosheth, and the 5 sons of Merab, the daughter of Saul, whom she bore to Adriel, the son of Barzillai the Mahilonite, and gave them into the hands of the Gibeonites, and they hanged them on the mountain before the Lord, and the 7 of them perished together.
Yeah.
And in one, it sounds like Mephibosheth gets off, and the other one, it sounds like he's hanging from a tree. So
yeah.
It kind of you don't want to extend the allegorization of 2 Samuel 9 out to chapter 21, because the analogy there between us and Mephibosheth falls apart.
Oh, wow. See, I just had the opposite thing just flash through my head, which was I thought you were going to say that like Christ takes our shameful name Mephibosheth and dies in our place. And wow, chapter 21 like completes the allegory, but that's the fun thing with allegory. you can
right.
Kind of just go do the opposite thing too. Yeah, no, actually, I peeked at chapter 21 there. Well, because it gets to something kind of weird actually in this text. So if I can make a slight detour before I get to that. So you got the question, right? Hang on a second. Who's left from the house of Saul? And it says here, so there's still a son of Jonathan, is what Ziba initially says, right? But then, so this is the thing. What was kind of interesting. So there's a couple instances of him being referred to as Jonathan's son, but then in verse 7, David says, "I will restore to you all the land of Saul, your father." And then this is interesting too. In verse 9, again, when David's talking, all that belonged to Saul and all his house, I've given to your masters. It says grandson. Well, it says there the son, or actually, it actually says your master's son there. So it's kind of an interesting thing, because whenever it seems like David talks about Mephibosheth, he refers to him as Saul's son. But whenever someone else talks about him in this chapter, it's as the son of Jonathan, son of Saul. So I think that's one of those, that's one of those patterns, and like what you mentioned in chapter 21, that I haven't looked, but I'd bet money on it that there's probably someone who's come along and said, like, well, this indicates, it's further proof of there being, multiple sources in 2 Samuel, and there's one that has this interpretation of who Mephibosheth was, and this other one who has this interpretation of who Mephibosheth is. And, we have seen this too with like multiple Ahinoams, right? And there's people who have different takes on that. But, putting that stuff kind of aside, I think that the straightforward thing, right, is that, names tended to get recycled in families. we actually saw this in chapter 8, just right beforehand, where it says that Ahimelech, the son of Abe Athar, was priest. And this happened so fast that I doubt anyone caught it. In fact, I didn't catch it the first time. But when you stop and you think about it, you're like, hang on a second. I thought Abe Athar was the son of Ahimelech. Which way is it, right? Well, likely solution, without positing all this kind of crazy stuff, is that there was a guy named Ahimelech. He named his son Abe Athar, and then his son Abe Athar named his son after his grandpa. And that happened all the time. So I think that you just kind of have a very strong pattern of naming people, naming your children after their aunts, uncles, grandmas, and grandpas, and that happens just kind of left and right. You kind of think about John the Baptist, how he wasn't named after any of Zechariah's relatives, and everyone was scandalized by that. So
that was a big deal.
Yeah, right.
His name is John.
Exactly. No, his name is John. I don't care about the standing tradition and the expectation, right? But it's a big deal. So that's a really long way of saying, like, yeah, it seems like there's a different Mephibosheth in the family, which just shouldn't really surprise us, though. But David, staying true to his word, is not cutting off the whole house. He will spare a remnant. Did I actually answer the question? This is...
Maybe. I think put an asterisk on your calendar that whoever comes out for 2 Samuel 21, make sure they've done their homework.
Just star and circle that, yeah. Yeah.
This is the easy chapter, 2 Samuel 9, right? This is, when you get this text, you're going to do Old Testament, and you get this one, it's pretty good. That's a little more complex.
Yeah.
But I mean, my thing is reading through is that this guy Mephibosheth has a very an interesting life for someone whose future should have been dictated by the ascendancy of David to the throne, and his life definitely went in a direction he didn't think. I mean, and if you want to extend the analogy or the allegory, he's betrayed by Ziba pretty clearly, and that again in the life of the believer, right? That's not uncommon. But he remains loyal to David, even when it looks like David may not be the winning team.
Yeah.
And again, when it comes back in chapter 19, he hasn't cut his hair, he hasn't cut his nails. He's this homeless looking guy, right? I mean, he's disheveled looking, but to show that he remained loyal to David. And at a time when, again, allegorizing, at a time when loyalty to Christ in our culture isn't going to get you anything. In fact, it may get you,
a lawsuit.
May result in persecution, right? There are examples of people remaining loyal, this, again, allegory, of remaining faithful, of trying to emulate the Lord's covenant faithfulness or hesed in our lives as much as we can. And you do see that a little bit in Mephibosheth. Again, it gets a little confusing in chapter 21, but no, this is one of those Mephibosheth, other than it's really hard to say and spell, and we're not going to name our kids after him, should be a household name.
Well,
it's just an incredible life.
Okay, you mentioned this, right? You don't. You jokingly said, this isn't what you name your children if you love them, and so I was just kind of chuckling about that because, well, hang on a second, this is Jonathan, right? Jonathan's a good guy. He's not naming his kid dog breath because he hates his children. So why is he naming his kid Mephibosheth, right? Well, I think that there's actually very strong textual evidence that this is another name change, just like how Ishbosheth was almost certainly not actually Ishbosheth, but actually Ishbaal. Same thing here. You'd expect that this was kind of an M. Baal name. Scholars have pointed to Marie Baal, which, so I guess you'd say like Maribel. Isn't like Maribel like a name? Like it's a girl's name, I think, but...
that sounds like a girl's name.
Yeah, I know, like it's like your point, can't give him a girl's name. But no, it wouldn't have been a girl's name. It would have been a pretty strong name. Like Marie Baal would have been something along the lines of God contends for me, or like really more particularly like the Lord will present my case, or the Lord will fight for my cause, or something like this. Like the Lord contends for me. Going back to the idea of how Baal was at that time, the word that was used for Lord instead of Adonai, and you see that on David's own lips, how after his victory against the Philistines a few chapters ago, he calls the place what was it, Pizar Baal or something like that, Paratz Baal. So I think that's pretty interesting because I think his name actually. In fact, Ziba's name kind of actually helps tell the story, because literally here, the Lord is actually fighting his cause, standing up for Mephibosheth or Maribel's cause, because he says, as you pointed out, David, that he wants to show the kindness of God, right? So because God has shown David grace, because the Lord has shown him grace, and has made these covenants and has really been true to Abraham's covenant, right, in the way that he's blessed David, that moves David to be kind and to be faithful to the covenants and to spare than for his fellow servants. So this is like the Lord's parable of like the unforgiving servant, but it's actually the forgiving servant in David. The Lord has enabled David to do this. And so because of the Lord doing this with David, the Lord is really the one who's saving Meribel. I mean, I think, I don't know. What do you think about that? Like, I think the names are almost, they always seem to be so deliberately mentioned, and the stories seem to be so deliberately crafted around the names.
The names definitely tell a story, right? As you were talking about what David does in terms of forgiving, it's forgiving and it's restoring. Because forgiving would be, I'm not going to kill you because you're connected to Saul.
Yeah.
Have a nice day.
Yeah, right.
And that would have been more than Mephibosheth would have expected. So, again, getting back to the names, I do think you see that in the overabundance of provision that David provides for Mephibosheth, more even than he would provide for natural-born members of his household, it would seem, restoring Saul's land to him, giving him 35 of Ziba's sons and servants, eating at the table always. Does David treat his own children that well? You know, and it is. You definitely see the treatment of Mephibosheth. So, in other words, when the Lord forgives us, it's not just I'm not going to punish you now get out of here. You know, it's I'm not going to punish you. I'm going to give you that which you do not deserve.
That's right.
Forgiveness, life, salvation.
Well, and I think along those lines,
you absolutely see that reflected in Maribel.
Yeah, well, and I think that along the same lines, if you see this as, you know, because of the grace that God shows David turns around and bestows royal grace on Maribel. Well, that's the same thing really in the resurrection. That, I mean, because this is the way that the scriptures talk, that God shows his son grace in a sense, that you know, he gets crucified and rejected, and then God says, no, this isn't right. I'm going to answer his prayers, and I'm going to bring him back from the dead, and I'm going to make him Lord in Christ. And so there's this sense where he gives this grace and this resurrection, and because of that, then we turn around. He turns around and gives to us then, like you were saying, not just like here a pardon, you know, a commute your sentence, but royal riches, right? And that's the idea of like the ascension. Man, I could just go. I love the allegory stuff. I think it's totally legit. I think it helps bring out the themes.
Well, and you have good standing to allegorize text, because when Jesus interprets his parable, he allegorizes, right?
That's right.
So
that's right.
We're in good footing there.
I want to get maybe one last question in, since we're about out of time here. So one of the things that came in over email here was, I guess, kind of taking this where David seems so gracious, right, and contrasting it with his harsh words with Michal earlier, right? You know, with his first wife, how, you know, he's like, hey, well, I'm the king, so, you know, forget you. I'll dance around like a crazy guy if I want to, because, you know, hey, God made me this, right? I mean, that does seem like a very striking contrast. Like on the one hand, it's like David gets a big head and is really terrible to his wife because of his status with God. But here, because of God's faithfulness to him turning around and acting then also with kindness. I mean, I think that is a striking contrast. Do you make anything of that?
And is it that he now is saying, he doesn't promise Michael, you know, hey, by the way I'm treating you is the way God's treated me. Mm-hmm. So you're seeing David being David.
Yeah.
And maybe acting a little bit rashly, maybe offering a defense of, look, this is my relationship with God is more important than, how you view my actions. But at any rate, he's not, the author of the text does not indicate that what David is doing there is godly. He's just reporting the facts. But here, the author shows us that what David is doing is his best approximation of the character, grace, and hesed of God.
Yeah, I like the best approximation, right? So, I mean, that's the thing. We pray that, you know, Lord have mercy, and may we not get big heads, and may we just approximate a little bit of the grace that he has given us instead of lording it over others. Thank you so much, brother. Love the conversation today. Again, congratulations on the child on the way. God bless.
Thy strong word. Produced by the Lutheran Church
Everybody, that's Pastor Duncan McClellan at St. Paul, Ankeny, Iowa, going on to chapter 10. Till next time, I'm Pastor A.J. Espinosa. Peace.
Your support is vital for this program to continue. You can make a gift safe, secure, and easily online at KFUO.org. Thank you for listening and supporting Thy Strong